Commander Jiho pressed his face against the cold metal wall of his cell, listening to the alien voices echoing through the Vorthak ship's corridors. 3 months had passed since the invasion, and his captors still believed they had won a complete victory. They were wrong. The day Earth fell began like any other morning in Seoul. Captain Minho was reviewing defense protocols at the Korean military headquarters when the first ships appeared in the sky. Massive, dark vessels that blotted out the sun and cast shadows across the entire city. Within hours, similar ships had appeared over every major population center on Earth. The Galactic Council had made their decision weeks earlier, though humans knew nothing of it then. In a sterile chamber orbiting a distant star, 3 alien species had gathered to divide a world they had never truly studied. The Vorthak Empire, with their scaled hides and razor-sharp claws, saw Earth as a source of expendable soldiers. The Zelani Federation, tall and thin with calculating eyes, viewed the planet as a treasure trove of rare minerals and cheap labor. The Ethereal Collective, beings of pure energy inhabiting crystalline bodies, wanted human minds to serve as living computers. Each species believed they understood humanity perfectly. The Vorthak had observed human conflicts and deemed them primitive but useful for cannon fodder. The Zelani had monitored Earth's economy and saw only inefficient resource management. The Ethereals had scanned human thoughts and found what they considered simple, easily controlled minds. They had all missed the most important detail. Admiral Yuna stood in the command center beneath Seoul, watching the invasion unfold on dozens of screens. Her voice was calm when she gave the order that would change everything. All units, stand down. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the alien forces. The order confused many soldiers. Captain Minho felt his hand tighten on his weapon as he watched alien troops march through the streets of his city. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, but Admiral Yuna's voice echoed in his earpiece, survive. Learn. Remember. The conquest was swift and brutal. Earth's military forces offered token resistance before surrendering. Cities fell one by one as alien ships landed in public squares and parks. The invaders expected desperate battles, last stands, heroic sacrifices. Instead, they found a species that seemed to accept defeat with surprising calm. Dr. Sumin was among the first group of humans loaded onto a Vorthak transport ship. The former caste researcher kept her head down as reptilian guards shoved prisoners into cramped holding cells. But her eyes never stopped moving. She memorized the layout of the ship, counted guard rotations, and studied the alien technology surrounding her. The Vorthak general who addressed the human captives was typical of his species. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with dark green scales and burning yellow eyes, he radiated the confidence of a predator addressing prey. His translator device converted his harsh growls into human languages. Your resistance is over, he announced to the packed cargo hold. Your world belongs to the Vorthak Empire now. You will work in our factories, fight in our armies, and die for our glory. Those who serve well may live longer than those who resist. The humans listened in silence. Some wept quietly. Others stared at the floor. A few looked directly at the general with expressions that might have been resignation or calculation. The Vorthak commander saw only broken spirits and conquered minds. He could not have been more wrong. In the days that followed, human prisoners were distributed among the 3 conquering species like goods at a market. The strongest went to Vorthak military installations to be trained as expendable soldiers. The smartest were claimed by the Ethereal Collective for mental labor. Everyone else was shipped to Zelani mining operations and manufacturing plants scattered across a dozen worlds. What the aliens failed to understand was that humans had not given up. They had made a strategic choice. Captain Minho found himself assigned to a Vorthak weapons facility on a moon orbiting a red giant star. The work was backbreaking, the conditions harsh, and the alien overseers cruel. But every day he worked alongside the massive plasma cannons and energy shields, he learned something new. The Vorthak technology was advanced but not impossible to understand. More importantly, it had weaknesses. Dr. Sumin was transported to an ethereal research station where human minds were linked to alien quantum computers. The process was agonizing, but it gave her unprecedented access to ethereal technology and communication networks. While her captors believed they were draining her thoughts, she was actually mapping their entire digital infrastructure. On mining worlds controlled by the Zelani Federation, thousands of humans operated complex extraction equipment under the watchful eyes of their tall, thin captors. The aliens saw only obedient workers. They did not notice how quickly humans learned to operate, maintain, and modify the machinery. They did not realize that human workers were sharing information through subtle gestures and coded conversations. The Vorthak general who had addressed the first group of prisoners received regular reports from his facilities across the galaxy. Production was meeting expectations. The human slaves were performing adequately. There had been no significant escape attempts or rebellions. Everything was proceeding according to plan. He never thought to question why a species that had shown such promise for military service was proving so remarkably compliant. He never wondered why human workers seemed to adapt so quickly to alien technology. He never suspected that his prisoners were not broken at all, but simply patient. The greatest mistake the three alien civilizations made was believing that conquest meant victory. They had taken Earth's cities, captured its people, and claimed its resources. But they had not conquered the human spirit, and they had gravely underestimated human intelligence. The real war was just beginning. Sergeant Doyun wiped the blood from his cracked hands on his work clothes and picked up another piece of burning metal. The Vorthak forges were designed for reptilian skin that could handle extreme heat. Human flesh was not meant for this work, but the alien overseers did not care about human pain. Around him, dozens of other human workers moved like ghosts through the massive factory. Steam rose from cooling weapons while the constant hammering of metal filled the air with deafening noise. The Vorthak guards watched from elevated platforms, their yellow eyes scanning for any sign of rebellion or laziness. What they could not see was the careful way Doyun studied each plasma rifle as it passed through his station. 2 years of forced labor had taught him how every component fit together. He knew which parts controlled the power output, which circuits managed the targeting system, and most importantly, which connections could be modified without detection. The sergeant caught the eye of Minjun, a former electronics engineer working 3 stations away. A slight nod passed between them. Minjun had discovered something important about the rifle's safety mechanisms during his shift. Tonight, during the brief rest period, that information would be shared with others. On the distant mining world of Kepler 442b, Hyojin felt her muscles scream in protest as she guided the massive drill through another section of rock. 16 hours of work with only 2 short breaks was becoming normal. The Zelani overseers, tall and thin with pale blue skin, moved between the human workers with cold efficiency. The mine stretched deep into the planet's core, following veins of rare crystals that powered Zelani technology. Human workers operated the dangerous equipment while their alien masters counted profits from safe observation decks. The work was deadly, the conditions harsh, and the pay non-existent. But Hyojin had not wasted her 2 years in captivity. Her job required her to move throughout the entire mining complex, maintaining communication between different work areas. The Zelani thought she was simply following orders, but she was actually mapping every tunnel, every storage area, every weakness in their operation. She knew exactly how much ore was extracted each day, where it was processed, and when transport ships arrived to collect it. More importantly, she knew which systems controlled the mine's life support, security, and communication networks. Information that would be very valuable when the time came to use it. Dr. Sunyo felt the familiar pain as the ethereal device connected to his mind once again. The crystal beings had no physical bodies, existing as pure energy that inhabited specially designed containers. They had taken the most intelligent humans and turned them into living computers, forcing human brains to process calculations too complex for their quantum machines. The mental connection was agonizing. Human thoughts were not meant to merge with alien technology. Many captives had lost their minds entirely, becoming empty shells that could only follow simple commands. But some, like Sunyo, had found ways to protect their consciousness while appearing to cooperate. The ethereals believed they were draining human creativity and intelligence for their own purposes. They did not realize that the connection worked both ways. While they used human minds to solve their problems, Sunyo was learning to navigate their digital networks. Every force calculation taught him more about their systems and revealed new vulnerabilities. Lieutenant Jiwon moved carefully through the supply depot, checking inventory lists and updating shipping records. The aliens had placed humans in charge of maintaining their logistics networks because the work was considered too boring and unimportant for their own people. This was another critical mistake. What appeared to be routine supply management was actually something much more sophisticated. Jiwon had spent 2 years building a secret communication system that connected human communities across 12 different worlds. Supply requests contained coded messages. Shipping schedules included information about alien military movements. Even simple inventory reports carried intelligence about enemy weaknesses and opportunities. The network was invisible to alien monitoring because it looked exactly like normal administrative work. Guards saw only humans doing the tedious paperwork necessary to keep their empire running smoothly. They never suspected that their slaves were using the same systems to coordinate a growing resistance movement. Professor Teeman tried not to scream as the ethereal scientist activated another painful device. As a former psychology professor, he had been selected for special experiments designed to understand human behavior and motivation. The aliens wanted to know what made humans fight, what made them surrender, and what made them loyal. Each experiment was designed to break down human mental resistance and map the structure of human consciousness. The ethereals prodded and measured every response, recording data about fear, pain, hope, and despair. They believed they were learning to control human minds more effectively. But Teeman was studying them as carefully as they studied him. Every experiment revealed something about ethereal psychology and their technological limitations. He learned that their energy forms were actually quite fragile when separated from their crystal containers. He discovered that their collective consciousness had blind spots that could be exploited. Most importantly, he realized that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The three alien civilizations continued to congratulate themselves on their successful conquest. Production reports showed that human workers were meeting all expectations. There had been no major rebellions or escape attempts. The slave population appeared to be adapting to their new role in the galactic order. What the aliens could not see was the careful network of communication, learning, and preparation that had grown stronger every day for 2 years. Human captives had not broken under the pressure of slavery. Instead, they had used their suffering as a classroom, their pain as motivation, and their apparent defeat as camouflage. The resistance was no longer just an idea or a hope. It had become a reality, invisible but powerful, patient but determined. Soon, their captors would learn the difference between conquest and victory. Chief Engineer Dong-hyun crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel of the Vorthak battle cruiser, his tools carefully hidden beneath loose panels. The reptilian guards never bothered to check the engine rooms thoroughly. They considered maintenance work beneath their warrior dignity, leaving such tasks to their human slaves. 3 years of forced labor had given Dong-hyun complete access to every ship system. He knew which power cables fed the weapons array, which circuits controlled navigation, and which connections could be quietly modified without triggering immediate alarms. Tonight, like many nights before, he would make small changes that would cause major problems later. The plasma cannon that had destroyed his hometown would mysteriously lose power during the next patrol. The shield generators that protected Vorthak troop transports would develop convenient blind spots. One by one, the Empire's most powerful weapons were being sabotaged by the very people they had enslaved. Above him, Vorthak officers discussed their next military campaign, unaware that their ship was slowly being turned into a floating trap. Dong-hyun finished his work and crawled back to his assigned quarters, where he would sleep for 3 hours before his next shift began. On the trading station orbiting Zelani Prime, economic analyst Cha Young sat before screens filled with financial data. Her alien supervisors had learned to trust her completely after 2 years of perfect work. She processed trades, managed currency exchanges, and maintained the complex databases that kept Zelani commerce flowing smoothly across dozens of worlds. What they did not know was that Cha Young had been making tiny adjustments to their economic algorithms for months. A fraction of a percent added here, a small calculation error there, invisible changes that slowly redirected Zelani wealth toward Earth-based commodities and human-controlled accounts. The effects were finally becoming visible. Zelani credits, once the most stable currency in the galaxy, had lost 15% of their value in the past month. Earth wheat, dismissed as primitive food, was now worth more than Zelani crystal processors. Human-made textiles were suddenly in high demand while Zelani luxury goods sat unsold in warehouses. The merchant princes blamed market volatility and economic cycles. They held emergency meetings and hired expensive consultants to analyze the mysterious trends. None of them suspected that their most trusted human analyst was systematically destroying their financial empire from within. Dr. Sunyo felt the familiar electric pain as the ethereal device connected to his consciousness once again. But this time, instead of resisting the mental link, he embraced it. 3 years of forced connection had taught him to navigate the ethereal quantum network like a native. The energy beings believed they were using human minds as biological computers, forcing captive consciousness to process their most complex calculations. They thought the mental connection was completely under their control. This was their fatal error. Human consciousness, it turned out, was far more adaptable than any alien technology. While the ethereals drained human thoughts for their own purposes, humans were learning to think like ethereals. Sunyo had discovered how to hide his own thoughts while accessing theirs. More importantly, he had learned to create secure communication channels within their psychic network. The breakthrough came suddenly. One moment he was alone in the alien mental space, and the next he could sense other human minds across the galaxy. Thousands of captured humans who had been isolated for years were suddenly able to communicate freely without their captors detecting anything unusual. The psychic prison had become a liberation network. Captain Minho stood in what had once been a Zelani storage facility but now served as a secret meeting place for the growing resistance. Representatives from dozen different worlds had gathered to share information and coordinate their activities. Most were human, but some were members of other species who had grown tired of the three-way occupation. The message from Earth had been brief but clear. Admiral Yuna's face appeared on improvised screens throughout the facility, her expression calm but determined. Behind her, Minho could see the familiar mountains near Seoul, but something was different. The landscape looked more advanced, with structures that definitely had not existed before the invasion. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying to every hidden cell across the galaxy, 3 years ago, we made a choice to survive rather than die fighting a battle we could not win. That choice has given us something our enemies never expected: time to prepare. The holographic image shifted to show massive underground facilities filled with technology that looked both human and alien. Workers in familiar Earth military uniforms operated weapons and ships that combined the best of human engineering with captured alien designs. Our world was never fully conquered, Admiral Yuna continued. While our enemies celebrated their victory on the surface, we built a new civilization in the depths of our oceans and the heart of our mountains. We have studied their technology, improved their designs, and prepared for this moment. Captain Minho felt his heart racing as the implications became clear. Earth had not been sleeping for 3 years. It had been preparing for war. Phase 1 is complete, the Admiral announced. You have learned their weaknesses, infiltrated their systems, and built the networks we need. Now begins Phase 2. It is time to come home. The transmission ended, but its impact was immediate. Across 12 worlds, human slaves who had seemed broken and defeated for 3 years suddenly stood straighter. Their eyes held a new light, and their movements carried fresh purpose. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to turn apparent defeat into hidden victory, to learn from their enemies while their enemies learned nothing from them. The slaves were indeed ready to become the liberators, and their former masters had no idea what was coming. Vorthak Admiral Krex was drinking his morning stimulant when the first notes of human music began playing from his command console. The strange melody was unlike anything in the Vorthak military database, with a rhythm that seemed both haunting and energetic. He reached for the controls to silence the system, but nothing responded. Within seconds, every screen on the bridge displayed the same 2 words in multiple human languages: game over. The Admiral's yellow eyes widened as he realized that his flagship's entire computer network had been compromised. 3 years of trusting human slaves to maintain their technology was about to cost them everything. Below deck, Sergeant Doyoon stood in the center of the munitions factory with a plasma rifle in his hands. Around him, 24 human workers had simultaneously stopped their assigned tasks and begun moving with military precision. The Vorthak guards reached for their weapons, only to discover that their guns would not fire. 4 months, Doyoon and his team had been making small modifications to every weapon that passed through the factory. The changes were invisible and undetectable during normal operation. The guns worked perfectly for target practice, training exercises, and routine patrols. They only failed when pointed at human targets, thanks to recognition circuits that Doyoon had secretly installed. The factory was now under human control, but instead of destroying it, they began a new production schedule. Every weapon rolling off the assembly line would still look identical to standard Vorthak equipment. The difference was that these guns would be designed to protect humans rather than harm them. Across the galaxy on a Zelani trading station, economic analyst Cha Young watched numbers cascade across her screens as 3 years of careful planning finally bore fruit. The algorithms she had planted in the Zelani financial system were activating simultaneously, creating a chain reaction of economic disasters. The Zelani currency, once considered the most stable in the galaxy, was collapsing in real time. Trade routes that had generated profits for centuries suddenly showed massive losses. Shipping contracts that had seemed profitable yesterday were now bankrupting entire companies. Meanwhile, Earth-based commodities that the aliens had ignored as primitive were becoming the most valuable resources in known space. Zelani merchants who had built their fortunes on slave labor watched helplessly as their wealth evaporated. The same human they had trusted to manage their databases was systematically redistributing their assets to human communities across the galaxy. What had taken the Zelani centuries to build was crumbling in hours. Lieutenant Jiwon stood in the communications center of a prison facility on the mining world of Kepler 442b. Around her, dozens of screens showed similar scenes playing out across 47 different planets. The moment Admiral Yuna had given the signal, human workers in key positions had activated their hidden preparations. Prison doors opened simultaneously across multiple star systems. Security systems that had kept humans trapped for years suddenly began working for the prisoners instead of their guards. Communication networks that the aliens had forced humans to maintain were now broadcasting liberation instructions in dozens of human languages. The guards tried desperately to regain control, but their weapons remained stubbornly silent and their communication devices showed only static. The very technology they had trusted was turning against them, guided by human hands and human intelligence. Dr. Sunyo sat motionless in his restraint chair as the ethereal device connected to his mind for what would be the final time. But instead of submitting to their control, he opened every mental pathway he had discovered during 3 years of forced connection. The psychic network that the ethereals used to communicate across vast distances suddenly became a weapon against them. Human memories flooded into alien consciousness. The ethereals, who had never experienced individual emotion, were suddenly overwhelmed by human feelings of love, loss, hope, and determination. They felt the pain of separation from families, the anger of unjust imprisonment, and most powerfully, the burning desire for freedom that had sustained humanity through 3 years of slavery. For beings who existed as pure thought, the experience was devastating. Doubt crept into minds that had never questioned their actions. Fear touched consciousness that had never known uncertainty. Regret poisoned thoughts that had always been coldly logical. The ethereal collective, which had controlled minds for millennia, discovered that they could not control their own thoughts when faced with the full force of human emotional experience. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of a ship that bore no resemblance to any known design. The vessel combined the best elements of human engineering with technologies stolen from all 3 alien civilizations. Behind him, a fleet of similar ships moved in perfect formation toward their ultimate target, the Galactic Council's homeworld. The ships were crewed by humans who had spent 3 years learning every detail of alien technology while pretending to be broken slaves. They knew their enemies' weaknesses better than their enemies knew their own strengths. More importantly, they had spent those years improving on alien designs, creating weapons and defenses that their former captors could not match. News of the simultaneous uprisings was spreading across the galaxy faster than any government could control. Species that had watched the conquest of Earth with indifference were suddenly paying close attention. The humans they had dismissed as primitive slaves had just demonstrated capabilities that surpassed their former masters. The 3 civilizations that had divided Earth among themselves were discovering that they had not conquered humanity at all. They had simply given human intelligence 3 years to study, adapt, and prepare. The hunters had become the hunted, and the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting with every passing hour. The former slaves were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for justice, and they were winning. The Galactic Council chamber, once a symbol of alien power and authority, now felt more like a courtroom where the guilty awaited their sentence. Ambassador Huang sat at the central table that had previously been reserved only for the 3 ruling species. His simple human clothing contrasted sharply with the elaborate uniforms and ceremonial armor of the alien representatives who surrounded him. The Vorthak delegation sat in chairs that seemed too small for their massive frames. Their scales, once polished to a brilliant shine as symbols of warrior pride, now looked dull and scratched. Supreme General Korax, the same reptilian leader who had overseen the invasion of Earth, could barely meet the human ambassador's eyes. "Honorable humans," the general began, his voice carrying none of its former authority, "the Vorthak Empire acknowledges complete defeat. We offer total surrender of all military assets, all conquered territories, all slave populations. We ask only that you spare our homeworld and allow our species to continue existing." The words came out like broken glass, each one cutting at the general's warrior pride. 3 years ago, he had stood in this same chamber and boasted about the ease of conquering primitive Earth. Now he knelt before the very species he had enslaved, begging for mercy. The Zelani trade minister stepped forward next, her tall, thin frame trembling slightly. The economic collapse that Chae-Young had triggered had destroyed centuries of carefully built wealth. Entire Zelani colonies were facing starvation as their trade networks crumbled and their currency became worthless. "We offer our complete financial surrender," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "All assets, all trade routes, all technology patents. Our entire treasury is yours. We will work as laborious if necessary, but please allow our species to survive. We know we deserve no mercy, but we beg for it nonetheless." Behind her, other Zelani representatives nodded desperately. They had built their civilization on the backs of slave labor from dozens of conquered worlds. Now they faced the possibility of extinction because they had underestimated the wrong species. The most dramatic plea came from the ethereal collective's high mind speaker. The crystalline being's mental projections filled the chamber with waves of anguish and regret that even non-psychic species could feel. The collective consciousness that had once been so proud of their mental superiority was now fractured and chaotic. We offer the ultimate sacrifice, the ethereal being communicated through painful telepathic bursts. We will sever our connection to the collective consciousness. We will give up our psychic abilities permanently. We will become individuals, alone and powerless, if that is what it takes to earn forgiveness for our crimes against your species. The offer was staggering. For the ethereals, losing their psychic connection was essentially agreeing to become a completely different species. It was the equivalent of humans offering to give up their ability to think in exchange for survival. Admiral Yuna entered the chamber with the measured steps of someone who held absolute power. The same woman who had ordered human forces to surrender 3 years ago now commanded the most advanced fleet in galactic history. Her uniform bore no decorations or symbols of rank, but every being in the chamber recognized her authority. The alien representatives who had once treated her species like livestock now watched her with the desperate attention of condemned prisoners awaiting judgment. She carried with her the weight of representing not just humanity, but the future of galactic civilization itself. 3 years ago, you came to our world, she began, her voice calm but carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber. You saw our cities and called us primitive. You observed our people and called us weak. You divided our planet among yourselves like merchants splitting the profits from a successful business deal. The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably, but none dared interrupt. You enslaved millions of humans because you believed we had nothing to offer except labor. You scattered our families across dozens of worlds because you thought we were too broken to resist. You used our children as test subjects because you assumed we would never be strong enough to stop you. Admiral Yuna paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. You were wrong about our strength. Our people endured years of suffering while learning everything they could about your weaknesses. They pretended to be broken while secretly building the networks that would bring you down. They appeared defeated while actually preparing for victory. Dr. Sumin stepped forward, carrying a data tablet containing the terms that would reshape galactic politics forever. Her voice was steady and professional as she read the conditions that humanity was prepared to offer. Complete demilitarization of all aggressive forces within 5 years. War reparations paid over 50 years to rebuild human communities and compensate other species you have enslaved. Full technology sharing to ensure no species maintains overwhelming advantages over others. Supervised rehabilitation programs to help your civilizations develop more peaceful approaches to expansion and resource gathering. The terms were harsh but not impossible. More importantly, they offered something that none of the 3 alien species had ever provided to their own victims, a chance to survive and rebuild. But most importantly, Admiral Yuna concluded, we offer you something that your species have never shown to others. We offer you the opportunity to earn forgiveness through actions rather than words. We will not enslave you as you enslaved us. We will not scatter your families as you scattered ours. We will not treat you as property as you treated us. Commander Jiho watched the proceedings from his flagship in orbit above the Council world. 3 years ago, he had been a prisoner on a Vorthak ship, just another human slave destined for a short life of brutal labor. Now he commanded one of the most advanced vessels ever built, staffed by humans who had turned their suffering into strength. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. True power came not from the ability to inflict cruelty, but from the wisdom to show mercy when mercy was not deserved.